Hello everybody, you can call me Hunch, and today I'm going to be going over stacks. Now, if you've not watched my channel in the past, you know I've been a huge proponent of stacks, but I've also been very critical of stacks. Some of those reasons is that stacks never had a native Bitcoin use, meaning, smart contracts could execute on the stacks network without converting it to like sBTC or something like that, or actually using a stacks token. Now, they've recently come out with a white paper talking about sBTC, and that's important because that's a trustless peg. Now, if you know anything about smart contracts on Bitcoin, you know the base layer doesn't have it, and there's a good reason for it. I'm not going to go into too much detail, but it's basically so it can maximize decentralization. Okay, if you don't understand that, go look up the blockchain trilemma. So, we know that Bitcoin doesn't have the smart contract layer, so what do? They do use things like wBTC, which is wrapped Bitcoin, liquid Bitcoin, RSK Bitcoin, and if you don't know what any of those are, they're basically federated chains where you peg in your Bitcoin and peg it out, and there is some decentralization to it, but I think there is sacrifice to it. I'm not an expert on the differences and what makes one better than the other, but if you want to learn about it, go look it up. Now, people tend to prefer smart contracts on Ethereum because they're native to it, right? It's kind of less of a store of value. It's kind of less real money, but they prefer to use that because it's native to that base layer. And I would argue that that is basically the kill shot to Ethereum because society should be built on maximum decentralization. Now, that's my inner maxi talking. Ethereum may thrive. So let's not go into that, but let's go talk about stacks. Okay, so if you know about me, you know that I appreciate this this analyst's opinion. He used to work for ARK and Cathie Wood. He's relatively intelligent with his takes. He has been more accurate than most I've found. And he tweeted that when Bitcoin has access to a wider array of program utility, it blossoms within a network. Now, in this tweet, he's talking about Avalanche, okay, which is another smart contract platform like ETH, like Solana, like the rest of them, okay? So let's elaborate this further because he doesn't tend to talk about stacks. He'll throw in little things about stacks. He tweeted some random tweet, and then someone asked him, Chris, would love your thoughts on sBTC. Now, sBTC, again, is that peg in Bitcoin, peg out, but it's trustless, meaning you don't have to trust a federated chain. Now, there is possibly drawbacks, right? How decentralized is the stacks network? Is it truly trustless if it can be hacked, etc.? But as stacks grows, the decentralization will grow, I believe. So he writes, trustless Bitcoin peg is one of the most important things to unlock for stacks. Now, I couldn't find the tweet, but he also talked about stacks getting massive bids recently. I couldn't find that tweet, but I'll talk about more of that in the chart. What I also want you to realize is that sBTC is not for nothing, right? This guy is an entrepreneur with stacks, one of the first I've seen, and he's making something called NeoSwap. If you need to know what that is, it's basically trading NFTs with this unique AI sort of situation. But he's thinking about switching from stacks to sBTC, and I think that is a good thing, right? It creates demand for Bitcoin because you're using Bitcoin to peg into the contract layer and peg out of the contract layer. Now, just because all of this is happening doesn't mean stacks is going to go up, right? Stacks is competing with a lot of things, right? Ethereum, the Lightning Network, which does have some program ability. Some would say it's not trustless, blah, blah, blah. It doesn't have all the standard coding language that you need, but nonetheless, it does have some programmability. Okay, finally, I want to talk about active developers. If you don't know what Electric Capital is, they do an analysis every year on developers for Web3, different tokens, et cetera, et cetera. Now, all I want you to take from this big graph is that over time, it's going up, okay? And if you've recently read headlines about all these big tech companies laying off employees, it's nice to know that maybe those employees will be moving over to these chains, right? They'll be moving from centralized companies to decentralized companies, okay? Take that with a grain of salt. So obviously Bitcoin is not the biggest developer chain, and that's because it's open source. You know, nobody owns the chain, obviously, and these developers are usually shrouded in darkness because they don't want to give up their identity. They all go through donation and funding to support the network, and that's kind of how it should be. It's like being public service. It's like when you used to become a senator because you wanted to serve your community, or you became a mayor because you wanted to serve your community, rather than just trying to take the benefits from the system. So if you go down, Stacks is right here, okay? And what's important to me is not that it lost developers this year, because that's not a good trend, right? Over 2 years it gained, that's a better trend than 1 year. And over 5 years, we'll see if the trend is holding up. So don't be too neurotic about that. But what I want you to take into account is, and some of you may have not been around last cycle, is that EOS and XRP, those were huge chains last cycle, right? And those have more developers, I mean, less developers than Stacks, right? And Stacks went relatively unnoticed this last cycle. Now, it did gain a lot, right? It went up like, 10, 15x and then came back down. But relatively to the rest of the market, it went unnoticed. And that's a benefit for us, because if we know that Stacks is doing a good job, then over time, right, the true value will be more baked in, okay? Now, let's dive into the chart. Here's that high volume that the analyst I was speaking of was talking about, someone bidding up the price of Stacks. And let me move my face cam one more time. So if you're a trader, I really wouldn't be like too into this situation here, okay? So what could happen is it could gap up, but if it gaps up, it's probably going to gap up to that resistance line, okay? And if it gaps up to this resistance line, a couple things could happen, right? It could just bounce around and then go back down. But if it develops some type of support, my intuition, not as a trader, I'm not a trader, and I never say I'm going to be a trader, because traders lose money usually. Not always, but sometimes, right? Is that it will start moving higher, right? So if you're a trader, I'd wait for that level. If you're an accumulator and you believe in the network, this is probably the spot you want to, if it can establish some type of support around this line right here, okay? This line, I'm just marking it for you. Additionally, people late to the game, right? People who haven't been in Bitcoin as long as me. This may be a good chain to accumulate, because not only can it probably have outsized gains to Bitcoin, no guarantees with anything, not financial advice. It also hedges you because it's paying you in Bitcoin to stake it, right? And if you've watched some of my videos, you know that staking now is relatively easy with things like the Xverse app, okay? Download it on your phone. It works fantastic. Everything at your own risk, right? I don't know the developers personally. Like, everything you do is a risk with any chain. So just be very careful. But I think it would be a great way for newbies to get introduced to Bitcoin, right? Because it's bringing you right to that programmability, which is a little more complex. And the infrastructure around it is getting better, so it's making it easier for you. And then on top of that, you're hedging, not buying Bitcoin, so you can make outside gains, but you're still getting exposure to Bitcoin, right? Because if Bitcoin wins and it uses all these chains, right, around it, and it's not just the Lightning Network and the maxis are wrong, right? Stacks may be one of the main beneficiaries of that. And sorry if I said that wrong. So what do I think? I think I'm going to be buying more Stacks than Bitcoin. That's just me. I'm still buying Bitcoin. I'm buying Stacks. If you've watched some of my other videos, I'm also buying Space, which is fantastic. All innovation. I'm not afraid of risk. I know very well what I'm doing, but not financial advice. Do whatever you want. I'm just here to tell you what I think, and I hope it's informing you in a legitimate and non-biased ways. I don't want you to FOMO into anything. and I want you to make the best decision possible. So that's my thoughts on Stacks. I think it's growing. I think legitimate business and players are entering the market. I think that people on Ethereum who started on Bitcoin see the value in Stacks. I think people just coming into Bitcoin see the value in Stacks, right? Because they get exposure to Bitcoin, they get exposure to low cap. And if the developers are growing and there's a trend and it's already got more than some of the big dogs, right? Like XRP and stuff, those are billions and billions and billions worth of chain value, right? Market cap. And Stacks is at like 300 billion to 350 billion. I'm not sure, somewhere in there. Don't quote me. Then Stacks has a lot of upside. Okay. You know, I'm sure I'm going to get comments from a bunch of bozos who are all critical of me. Oh, Stacks went down. Every video I've ever made, I've said I'm not a trader. Okay, first of all. So don't be a bozo. Second of all, my main exposure is Bitcoin, right? So you don't know what you're talking about. But Stacks may be a good option for you. I think it's getting more recognition and it's kind of under the table, which again, if it continues to grow and it not getting a lot of recognition, that's good for us because we can continue to accumulate until we see a change in the trend, right? We see, okay, this is becoming an EOS, it's not gaining traction, etc. So use clear thinking, don't be afraid, don't sell the bottom, okay? Think about it. You can call me Hunch.